Hey guys, tonight we'll travel back to a freezing night in history, specifically, around the winter of 1325, in a small village in northern Europe. A time with no central heating, no double-glazed windows, and certainly no imported goose feather blankets. Only wind, mud, straw, and you, huddled in a thatched hut, trying to survive each icy gust. The air is damp and heavy with odors. The fire in the hearth crackles moodily, flickering with attitude. Around you are snores, the bleating of goats, the howling of wind, and the feeling that the cold is slipping its fingers into every gap in your clothing. You won't last more than 24 hours, unless you lie right next to the firewood, pile on 3 layers of wool, and add a cat on top. So, before you drift off to sleep, or start shivering just from imagining it, click like and subscribe to the channel, if you truly enjoy these soft little stories. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? I love reading comments like that, so don't be shy to share. Now dim the lights, turn on a quiet fan for some background noise, pull up your blanket, and let's begin tonight's journey. You wake up just before dawn. Not because of an alarm clock, that didn't exist. But because your feet are so cold they speak up first. You open your eyes. See the dark thatched roof above, the damp-smelling walls, and your sister breathing evenly beside you, her hair trailing across your face like a broom made of straw. You're lying on a layer of old straw, fairly soft if you don't think too hard about the fleas. Everyone in the house sleeps piled together like rolled cakes. Children in the middle. The elderly by the hearth. Those less favored sleep by the door, where the wind sneaks in like it has its own key. Outside, it's still dark. The wind wails like a hungry cat climbing the roof. Snow falls gently. And the air is so cold that just sticking a hand out from under the blanket makes your skin feel glued to the frost. Your house, like every peasant house at the time, has only one room. Low roof. Dirt floor. The walls are made from a frame of interwoven wood, plastered with a mix of mud, straw, and just enough animal dung to keep the warmth in, and stir arguments during dinner. To call it a house is generous. It's more of a communal nest/barn/kitchen. Chickens sleep on the rafters. Goats in the corner. And if your family is doing well, you might have a small pig, both an asset and a source of warmth. There's no chimney in the fireplace. The smoke doesn't know where it's going. It slithers up to the roof, out the cracks in the wall, or straight into your nose. Breathing the air here is like ancient lung training, warm, stinging, and somehow spiritually meaningful. You wear everything you own. A thick wool sweater, stiff as a grain sack. An outer coat made from coarse cloth, heavy, damp, and smelling like a wet dog. Underneath, patchy wool socks and rough wooden shoes lined with dry grass. In short, you're like a living onion, layer upon layer. But still cold, still shivering, still breathing out fog. And the bed? It's not really a bed. Just a pile of straw spread across the dirt floor, or if you're a high-class peasant, a cloth sack stuffed with old straw, soft in places that haven't been chewed by mice. Fleas are a complimentary bonus. Free of charge. And so you live. Not like in fairy tales, but in the gritty way. Tough. Uncomplaining. Every morning you wake up and can still count all your toes. That's a small win in the long battle against winter. And tonight, we'll go even deeper, to see what tricks, what miseries, and what tiny victories helped medieval peasants survive the winter. Because this wasn't the harshest part. No. That was only the opening act. In theory, you're living in a type of house with a rather lovely name. Wattle and daub. Sounds like an English dessert, but in reality it's a wooden frame woven like a basket, plastered with a mixture of mud, straw, tree roots, and, no joke, animal dung. Purpose? Insulation, warmth, wind protection. Side effects? Smell and insects. But hey, at least you're not paying a monthly electric bill. The walls, from a distance, might look sturdy, but in truth, they're so thin that if a chicken sneezes outside, you'll hear it. Winter wind slips through like someone with a spare key, gentle but relentless. You stuff moss into the cracks. If that's not enough, you add rags. No rags? Then dry grass. or even fallen hair. Back then, anything soft and free became potential building material. The floor? Don't picture anything fancy. It's compacted earth, relatively flat and perpetually damp. When snow melts or heavy rain falls, water seeps through the roof and pools in little puddles. You could say your house has built-in indoor fish ponds, though no fish could survive the cold. Walking through the house in winter is like stepping on sentient mud, sticky, freezing, and making squelching noises like it's complaining. If you drop a potato, just say goodbye. You'll see it again in spring. The roof is made of straw or thatch, thick and fluffy. Freshly laid, it looks nice, if you don't look too closely. But give it a few months of snow and rain, and it starts to sag, soak, and occasionally sprout mushrooms. Mice love it. Squirrels move in like free-loading tenants. You could be eating porridge when something drops into your bowl. Depending on the day, it might be bird droppings, a clump of dry debris, or an entire baby bat dozing off. Each strong gust of wind is a new trial. The roof shakes, the walls groan, and the whole house curls up like a cardboard box getting soggy. You clasp your hands and pray the roof doesn't fly off, because finding it in the snow won't be easy. Windows, if any, are tiny square holes covered with animal hide or grease-soaked cloth. The goal is to block wind, not to enjoy the view or moonlight. Here, sunlight isn't welcome if it brings cold with it. The door is a solid wooden plank, bolted with a crossbar and wedged with firewood to stop the wind from inviting itself in at midnight. The creaky door is a familiar soundtrack. Sometimes it's the wind, sometimes a person, and sometimes the neighbor's cat dropping by uninvited. Inside the house is a world of its own. Cramped, dark, and filled with a blend of aromas, kitchen smoke, damp wool, goats, and, of course, people. But you're used to it. Just as you're used to chickens sleeping on rafters, pigs resting their heads on your legs at night, and the rhythmic breathing of your whole family packed together like rice rolls. Furniture is minimal. A rough wooden table. A long bench that also serves as a bed during the day. A single hook to hang your wool hat and cloak. No wardrobe. Definitely no mirror. If you want to see your face, use a bowl of water, provided it hasn't frozen over. The only light in the house is the fire. Not a noble fireplace, just a circle of stones with charred black coals, smoke rising straight into the roof. No chimney, the smoke finds its own way out. When you inhale, you know for sure you're alive, because if you weren't, you wouldn't be coughing this hard. On freezing winter nights, the family gathers around the fire. Not for a feast, but to warm hands, dry feet, and watch the flames. Children listen to stories, the elderly mumble prayers, and the young breathe and scratch because of the itchy wool rubbing their skin. Usually, only those closest to the fire are warm. The ones farther away accept their fate. You might feel half your face glowing red while the other half goes numb. Like roasting yourself one side at a time. When it's time to sleep, you don't get into bed. You crawl into straw. Each person has a little space. Kids in the middle, adults on the outside. If your family is well off, you might have a cloth sack stuffed with straw as a mattress. If not, it's just the bare earth with a thin straw layer, where fleas and field mice might be hosting a birthday party. You cover yourself with whatever's available, old clothes, torn rags, stiff goatskin. If it's still cold, you pull the dog into sleep next to you, or the pig, if it's willing. In winter, the line between pet and heating system is completely blurred. Lights off. There are no lights. Just the dying fire, flickering like a tired eye. You lie down, pull your hood over your head, and try not to move, because every wiggle bumps someone else. And every bump means noise, lost sleep, and maybe a sweat to the backside, if you're the youngest. Above, a few old spiders are weaving webs like artists. In the corner, the old chicken wheezes. Outside, the wind still howls. And you, with your breath misting white like a newborn dragon, close your eyes, quietly hoping all your fingers are still there in the morning. And like that you sleep. In a hut that groans, surrounded by the stench of life and the sounds of endurance. A normal winter night, but for a medieval peasant, it's a small victory. Fire, in your world, isn't a convenience. It's a guardian spirit. A fragile boundary between life and freezing solid. And if you think you can just light it again each morning, congratulations, you've just doomed your entire household. You have to understand, there are no lighters, no matches. To start a new flame, you need flint, steel, dry tinder, and a fierce belief that Lady Luck is on your side. One wrong strike, a strong gust of wind, or even just a humid morning, and you'll wake up with hair as crispy as rice crackers. So the medieval folks came up with a brilliant technique, fire banking. Before going to bed, you take a long stick and gather all the embers and glowing coals into a small pile. Then you gently cover it with cold ash, not too thick, not too thin. Just enough to keep the embers glowing quietly underneath, without igniting. The next morning, with a soft breath and a little dry straw and kindling, the fire will flare up. If you did it right. If you did it wrong? Welcome to a morning of wrestling with flint while your fingers are numb and Grandma is yelling because the smoke is going straight into the porridge. Fire banking is an inherited art. Some families smear a little pig fat onto the coals before covering them. Others sprinkle salt. Some homes have an unbreakable rule: never let anyone named Edgar touch the hearth, because, according to great-grandfather, Edgar brings bad luck to fire. No one knows why. They just know that the one time Edgar touched the coals, a gust of wind rose up and half the roof burned down. During the coldest months, people even take shifts guarding the fire. Your family splits into watches. Father sleeps first, mother stays up to tend the fire, then they swap at midnight. Children are apprenticed early, meaning they hold the poker, cry from the smoke, and learn not to scream when they get a light burn. Tending the fire isn't like watching TV. It's like being both a witch and an engineer. You must listen to the crackle, watch the color of the coals, feel the warmth of the ash. If the fire crackles evenly, that's good. If it bursts like a cough, danger. If it's silent, check immediately, it might be dying. Sometimes, no matter what you do, the fire still goes out. Maybe because of a strong wind, maybe the ash was damp, or maybe someone, no one admits who, accidentally poured dishwater where the fire was. Sleeping. In that case, the household wakes up in gloomy silence, dim light, and someone, usually the youngest, has to run to the neighbors to ask for a glowing ember. That scene often comes with the phrase, "Go quickly, and don't drop it like last time." The ember is brought back wrapped in cloth, or hidden in a lidded pot. You carry it like a sacred relic, walking through the freezing mist, trying not to breathe too hard for fear the ash will scatter. Sometimes along the way, you meet an old woman carrying her own ember pot. The two of you lock eyes, nod, and say nothing. Comrades in the war against ice. In some homes, as a backup, they use hot stones. Before bed, a large stone is heated red in the hearth, then wrapped in old wool and buried under the straw. Very carefully, because otherwise you might find a burn hole in your cloak or a tiny scorched spot under your blanket known as the mark of 1314. Fire isn't just for warmth. It keeps away bedbugs, kills ticks, and makes rats think twice. Sleeping near the fire means sleeping with less worry, and smelling less like half-roasted chicken. But too close and you risk scorched hair, burnt clothes, or worse, your sibling kicking you into the fire while turning over. So in your house, the spot by the hearth is prestigious. Reserved for elders, children, or the sick. The strong sleep on the edges, where the wind still pops in to say goodnight. If you cough, you get pulled closer. If you wheeze, you get another layer. But if you snore too loudly, you get nudged to the side, with the line, "Even if you're freezing to death, we still want to sleep." At night, when everyone else is asleep, a pair of eyes remains half open. The firekeeper sits curled up, poking the coals, eyes half closed, cap drooping, occasionally murmuring a prayer or humming softly, not because they want to, but so they don't fall asleep. Every morning, if there's still fire, or even a single glowing ember, that's a victory. You've survived one more night. And the first thing to do, reignite the flame, warm your hands in the glow, and whisper, "Thank you?" Some things are small, but in those times, small didn't mean unimportant. That flickering flame, weak and wavering, was a symbol of hope. Under a sagging roof, in the cruelty of winter, fire was the one thing that must never die. And now you know. To survive a medieval winter, you don't need luck. You need dry ash, a long stick, unshakable patience, and someone willing to stay awake at 2 a.m. You think you've ever had to squeeze onto a tiny bed at a cheap homestay? Or sleep shoulder to shoulder with distant relatives during the holidays? Bad news, you've seen nothing yet. On a winter night in the Middle Ages, if you weren't wedged between a grandfather snoring like thunder and a goat dreaming of grass, then chances are, you'd already frozen to death. Back then, people understood one simple but vital truth: body heat was the best, most reliable, and only free source of warmth once the fire started to fade. And like any valuable resource, you had to gather as much of it as possible. So each night, people didn't go to bed. They assembled, like a determined army facing the White Death. The whole family, sometimes even neighbors, squeezed into the smallest, warmest corner of the house, usually next to the hearth, the driest spot, and the least windy. They pressed tightly together. Not two people in a bed. Everyone in one pile. Children were stuffed in the center, like the soft filling. Elders lay near the middle too, but close enough to feel the heat. Adults formed the outer layer, a tough shell, wind blockers, and pig deterrents. No one slept alone. No one had room to roll. If you moved too much, you might kick a sleeping pig, or worse, knock Grandpa off the edge onto the cold, stone-like dirt floor. You didn't have a down comforter. You had coarse woolen cloth, a few discolored sheepskins, and whatever cloak you hadn't taken off yet. People slept in full clothing, with layers stacked on top of one another. Empty sleeves were stuffed into gaps like makeshift thermal barriers. Old rags, burlap sacks, even tufts of animal hair were pushed into bed cracks, wall crevices, or tossed over someone as an extra layer. And yes, the livestock joined the survival party too. You imagine a bedroom. But this was a living barn. The goat lay near your feet, because it was warm and usually quiet. The pig often took the central spot, where the temperature was most stable. Chickens hid in a straw basket in the corner, occasionally flapping or clucking like they were discussing the weather. The night was calm, but not silent. Breathing sounds, wheezing, the wind whistling through door gaps, the creak of rotting wood, and something, wet underfoot. Could be rain seeping in. Could be a cow, marking territory. Who knows? You lay still, unbothered. Because standing up meant losing your spot. Losing your spot meant losing heat. Losing heat meant losing toes. In truth, sleeping with animals was a strategic move. It kept you warm and lowered the risk of theft. Nobody could sneak into a house guarded by 6 chickens, 3 pigs, and a goat ready to raise an alarm with a headbutt. Of course, no one claimed this was pleasant. You inhaled all 5 seasons in one breath: smoke, sweat, decaying grass, damp wool, animals, and very likely, a bit of foot odor. But you got used to it. Your nose adapted faster than you thought. People even developed strategic sleeping tactics. The heavier folks slept on the edge to block the wind. The frail-hearted stayed in the middle. Some families had a winter sleep chart, rotating every week to ensure fairness and equal heat distribution. Occasionally there were complaints. Why do I always end up next to the goat? But mostly, people stayed silent. Because everyone knew, freezing to death isn't fun. Then comes early morning. As pale light slips through the wooden slats, as some rooster somewhere belts out the first crow, everyone starts to stir. People yawn, rub their hands, shiver. Someone screams after stepping barefoot on an ice chunk inside the room. Someone else yells because the pig ate half their cloak. But everyone is still alive. Another night survived. Another victory over the White Death. Together. In warmth. In the chaotic fragrance of real life. You pull your coat tighter, shake straw from your hair, and step outside. It's cold. Very cold. But inside, there's still a faint trace of last night's warmth. You made it. And tonight you'll crawl back into that nest, with family, with livestock, with a quiet sense of pride that, cramming together was never a choice, it was the only way. You open your eyes in the biting cold. Your breath turns into white smoke in the air. You reach for your coat, only to realize you're still wearing it, from last week. And no, you didn't forget to wash it. You left it that way on purpose. Welcome to one of the stranger but effective survival strategies of the Middle Ages, using dirt as a natural layer of insulation. You might find this hard to believe, but in a world where doing laundry meant breaking ice, soaking your hands in freezing water, and hanging wet clothes on a tree for the northern wind to dry over 3 days, cleanliness was no longer the priority. Staying alive was. A wool tunic, after 2 unwashed weeks, soaked in sweat, fire ash, and a little bit of cooking lard, would begin to form a sort of biological armor. That grease-ender layer filled the gaps between the fibers, making it harder for cold wind to get in, unlike a freshly cleaned one. Some called it self-insulation. Others called it handmade cold protection. And some, mainly people from the 21st century, called it horrifying. But in the Middle Ages, it was smart. Doing laundry in winter wasn't a light activity. It was an expedition. First, you had to find water that wasn't completely frozen, maybe a stream still flowing beneath the ice. Then, plunge your hands into the cold scrub with soap made from ash and animal fat, which smelled like, well, let's skip the description. After washing, you wring it out, not very effectively, then hang it up to dry. And then? You pray. Because wet clothes don't dry, they freeze. If you're not careful, your precious shirt becomes a fabric ice block, standing upright like a soldier in the yard, and unwearable until spring. That's why most medieval folks didn't wash clothes in winter. They picked one good set, usually one that already smelled of smoke, had a few burn holes, and maybe a mysterious bloodstain or 2, and wore it non-stop. The longer you wore it, the thicker the layer of dirt, ash, grease, sweat became. Strangely enough, it helped trap heat. Your shirt became heavier, rougher, but wind couldn't get through. And the smell? You couldn't smell it anymore. Not because it stopped smelling, but because you'd gotten used to it. In fact, many believe that washing clothes in winter made you more likely to fall ill. Not because of bacteria, that concept didn't exist, but because cooling your body during washing made you sick from a weak spirit. A curse scarier than any mountain demon. They even passed down tips like never change clothes in the wind. If you must change, do it near the fire or while hugging a chicken. Only wash clothes if truly necessary. Truly necessary, meaning when the shirt can stand on its own. Children were bundled up so tightly they looked like walking fermented turnips. They didn't complain, because cold was an enemy every child understood, long before learning their first letter. Gloves? Very rare. People usually wrap their hands in rags or stitched scraps of animal hide. Some used cloth bags over their entire hand. You couldn't do much, but at least your fingers wouldn't fall off in your sleep. Wool hats, scarves, hand-knit socks, these were family heirlooms. Losing a hat was a tragedy the size of losing a sheep. And when spring finally came, the first task wasn't planting crops. It was washing everything. The rivers became group campsites. People washed, beat, scrubbed, and laughed with relief. We made it through winter. And we're still alive to smell ourselves. You're tired after a long day of chopping wood, massaging the cow's legs, because it sleeps next to you, and trying not to freeze. There's no Netflix, no hot tea, and certainly no central heating. In front of you lies your bed, or rather, a worn fabric sack stuffed with old straw, perched unevenly on a few warped wooden slats or directly on the frozen dirt floor. And you think, like a philosopher with back pain, at least I'm not sleeping outside in the snow. Sleeping on straw, in this context, is a privilege. And if you've ever thought sleeping on the ground was only for hopeless optimists, congratulations, you've officially entered the world of medieval peasants, where everything is a beta version still waiting for updates. Beds, if you can call them that, had no mattresses, no springs, and certainly no memory foam to cradle your spine. It was usually a rickety wooden frame, if you were lucky. Otherwise, just a pile of straw spread on the icy ground, accompanied by a sliver of hope and a few whispered prayers before sleep. Some folks skillfully stitched fabric into straw-filled sacks. Others simply scattered straw and laid down. Everything was acceptable, as long as you weren't picky. The problem is, straw isn't loyal. After a few weeks, it flattens, gets damp, starts to smell, and develops a personality, usually of the self-destructing type. It also becomes the perfect home for uninvited guests: lice, fleas, ticks, mites, wood beetles, and a bustling parasite community. You won't see them, but you'll know, because you'll itch. Deeply. Soulfully. You turn over, hoping to find a less painful spot. The straw rustles like the footsteps of a mini band of raiders marching across your back. 5 minutes later you turn again. More rustling. A nightly symphony of discomfort, without soothing background music, only creaks and scratching, sometimes a sigh that echoes into your dreams. Some households didn't use fabric sacks. They laid straw directly on the floor, mixed with fragrant herbs like mint or rosemary, not for scent, but to mask the smell of the room itself. Unfortunately, the effect only lasted for one night. After that, the winter wet straw smell takes center stage, an energetic symphony you'd rather not hear again. By the end of winter, the straw beneath you was no longer a bed, it was a creature, a sentient being capable of making noise. It clung, it sagged, it made odd sounds when you exhaled too hard. And that's when you knew, it's time to change the bedding. In medieval terms, that meant gathering all the straw, burning it, praying the bugs died with it, then begging or stealing fresh straw from the nearest field. A socially engaging experience with moderate criminal risk. Some families only changed straw twice a year, once after winter, once before. Which meant you lay on the same material for at least 6 months. In that time, it had absorbed sweat, drool, spilled porridge, rainwater from a leaking roof, and a few unpleasant memories. But as long as it wasn't completely wet, it was considered still good. Some regions used dry leaves, reeds, or tree roots instead of straw. As long as the material wasn't too sharp, didn't mold, and didn't attract poisonous insects. A lively and flexible standard of comfort. But regardless of what you used, within a few weeks, it always became an unwanted, organic version. Of course, there were tricks. Mix dried mint or garlic into the straw, repels insects and neighbors. Sun the mattress, whenever the sun exists, which means around June. Scratch smart. Learn how to scratch without sending straw flying everywhere. A pillow? That was a half-empty flour sack or a scrunched-up, smelly piece of cloth. Blanket? Your grandfather's cloak, who is sleeping 20 centimeters away. And don't expect a soft blanket. It's stiff, heavy, and may roll itself up in the middle of the night. Basically, you're wrestling your blanket in your sleep. When you close your eyes, your only hope is to wake up with all 10 toes unfrozen. If you dream of sleeping on a soft mattress, under a down comforter, with scented candles and a fat cat snoozing at your feet, congratulations. You're not dead, you just dreamed of heaven. Then you wake up to find a bug crawling across your cheek, and the straw beneath your back stuck to you like cold porridge. You smile faintly, stand up, brush off the dust, and carry on. Because you're a medieval peasant. And a good night's sleep, like all other privileges, is a luxury. After a night wrestling with a straw pile that seemed to have its own emotions, you wake up in the faint light filtering through a piece of animal hide loosely pinned over the doorframe. The air is as cold as an open freezer, and each breath turns into a thin wisp of smoke, light as a wandering ghost. You shiver, not from fear, but because the wind has slipped through the cracks in the wall, blowing straight down your spine as if whispering, "Good morning, enjoy your cold." Your house, or more accurately your hut, is built in the wattle and daub style, meaning a few wooden sticks woven together like a mushroom basket, then smeared with a mix of mud, straw, and of course, animal dung. Not because folks back then enjoyed the scent of barns, but because dung helped with adhesion and insulation, at least in theory. Your walls aren't very thick. Standing inside, You can clearly hear the wind howling outside, the sound of goats walking by, and occasionally, a neighbor sneezing on the other side of the wall. Privacy feels like an abstract concept. Everything is heard, everything is shared, or at least overheard. The roof is thick thatch. At first glance, it looks like something out of a fairy tale. But that illusion only lasts until the second winter. Thatch absorbs water. When snow falls, the roof transitions from cozy to soaked. If you're lucky, only one corner leaks. If not, the entire cooking area becomes a small pond, suitable for raising fish if you're feeling creative. There are definitely mice, because where there's straw, spilled food, and a touch of warmth, there are rodents. They live in the roof, under the floor, in storage boxes, and sometimes, unfortunately, inside your straw mattress. If you've ever had a mouse bite your ear in the middle of the night, congratulations, you've officially become part of the medieval folklore experience. The floor is compacted earth, pounded flat and hard. When the rain lasts too long, the soil turns moist, forming a layer of sticky mud beneath your feet. You walk around making squelch squelch sounds, leaving behind footprints like a mud puppet show. Some families try spreading straw on the floor to keep it dry, but after a few days, that straw turns black, soggy, and uncomfortably lively. If someone ever said, "Home is where the heart is," they clearly never lived in your damp, moldy hut. Here, it's not your heart that belongs, it's your lungs. Lungs that now belong to the smoke, dust, and creeping mold that inhabit every particle of air. There's no chimney. The smoke from the hearth just floats freely around the house, creating a thin mist indoors. Everything is equally smoked: pots, hair, cloaks, even the stale bread on the table. You breathe through your nose, slowly and evenly, to stay warm and to avoid choking. But perhaps the most charming part of the house is the crowding. On average, a peasant hut held between 5 and 10 people, not including dogs, chickens, and sometimes one stubborn goat. Everyone sleeps together, eats together, breathes together, and if one person gets sick, the whole house will be sneezing in perfect unison within 3 days. There's no separate bedroom. One corner of the hut is the kitchen, another is the bed, another is the woodpile, and right in the middle lies the snoring pig. It's an open concept layout, before open concept became a trend. When you need to relieve yourself at night, you have 2 options. 1. Step outside and battle the cold wind and muddy ground. 2. Use the wooden bucket left in the corner of the house, a method nobody wants to get too close to. Neither option is luxurious, but you get used to it. Because you have to. And so the morning begins with relighting the fire that's gone out overnight. If you forgot to bank the ashes to preserve embers, then sorry. You'll be striking flint in the freezing wind, hands trembling, while the whole household stares at you as if you're the lone wizard with the power to defeat the cold. At that moment, a spark catching dry grass and flaring into flame feels like a miracle. That small, flickering flame in the smoky corner of the hut isn't just heat. It's hope. Hope that you'll make it through today. That the chicken will lay eggs. That the bread hasn't gone moldy. And that the roof won't cave in during the next storm. A medieval house wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed to survive. To survive the cold nights, the long winters, and the biting winds that never needed an invitation. And in that harshness, people learned to endure, to accept, and sometimes, to chuckle softly when the roof leaked during dinner. Because no matter what, as long as you're alive, there's still hope. Still straw to lie on. Still smoke to breathe. And if you're lucky, still a rooster crowing at dawn, welcoming a new day in the crooked little hut you still call home. You open the door of your hut, and the first thing that hits your face isn't sunlight. It's a gust of wind sharp as a blade. The winter morning air is so cold it could freeze your tears before they fall. The sun is there, sure, but only for decoration, not for warmth. You step outside, your feet sinking lightly into frozen mud and snow, and you feel your toes slowly going numb. If one morning you step in goat dung and don't feel it, you might want to check if your toes are still there. Contrary to what you might imagine, winter isn't a time for rest. In fact, it's a season of subtle survival trials, The work doesn't go away, it just changes form. When there's no plowing or planting, you fix the roof, weave baskets, patch clothes, and most importantly, figure out what you're going to eat tomorrow. Winter is the season of hunger. The cold doesn't just sit in the air. It seeps into every corner of the barn, every bowl of porridge, every curt word exchanged in the house. It even crawls into your stomach, because all that's left to eat is black bread, pickled turnips, and if you're lucky, a bit of thin oatmeal left over from last month. Firewood, as precious as gold, has been stockpiled since summer. But you always hesitate. Burn it now for a little warmth, or save it for an even colder night? And there's always a colder night coming. So most people burn just enough, a small, weak flame nestled in ashes and hope. You might see a familiar sight, the whole family huddled around the hearth. Not to tell fairy tales, but to warm their hands and avoid freezing. Children sleep in their parents' laps, the adults wear extra blankets, and the elder sits closest, because they're the fragile treasures, needing warmth like a delicate piece of ancient pottery. Morning chores sometimes include hauling water from the well or river. The sound of water splashing into the wooden bucket is refreshing, until you realize your hands have gone numb and the yoke strap is slicing through your shoulder. Winter water doesn't just chill, it has a personality. It wants to test your patience, and usually it wins. If the snow gets thick, just walking from your house to the cowshed becomes an expedition. Every step is a gamble. Will you slip, fall, or step in something mysterious? And the cow? It exhales warm air and looks at you like it's the only intelligent creature actually enjoying its own body heat. Shoveling manure becomes a steady source of income, keeping the floor warm, making fertilizer, and sometimes, if someone's truly desperate, plaster for the walls. Yes, that's right. In winter, anything that doesn't melt can become building material. Out in the fields, everything is asleep. But you still have to check the fences, set mouse traps, and if the gods are kind, maybe catch a rabbit or two, a luxury feast with real meat, even if just a few bites. If not, you're back to black bread, served with cold wind. Clothing isn't changed daily, or even weekly. You wear layer after layer of wool, cloaks, and headscarves until you look like a walking pastry roll. But no one laughs, because they look the same. Taking off your coat is like a sacred ritual, unwrapping the outer layer and praying that nothing crawls out. But winter isn't only cold. It also holds quiet evenings. When everyone curls up by the fire, whispering stories of the village, the seasons, and the spirits. In those moments, without lamps, without luxury, there's warmth. The medieval kind. Maybe a mouse scurries by. Maybe the roof leaks. But if you're breathing, eating, and hearing laughter, you're lucky. The year is 1346. The land you live on doesn't even have an official name yet. But the winter is as bitter as ever. And you, an ordinary villager, are still trudging through snow and wind and endless days, like a wool tunic that never quite dries. You have no idea the world is about to fall into the worst pandemic in recorded history. All you know is that you need to gather more firewood tomorrow. Because survival is a quiet thing, repeated each day. And winter, cruel as it is, never lasts forever. After spending the whole morning trying not to freeze to death, you begin to understand that one crucial part of medieval survival isn't strength, it's hacks. Tiny tricks passed down from one generation to the next, often sounding absurd, but sometimes they're the reason you wake up with all your fingers and toes still intact. Take banking the fire, for example. Instead of putting the fire out at night, you cover the glowing embers with a layer of ash, like tucking in the flames with a blanket, so that by morning, you can just stir it gently and have a fire again. Done right, it saves wood and effort. Done wrong, good morning, frostbite. It sounds simple, but it takes practice. Some say only dry ash works. Others swear it needs to be slightly damp to hold the heat. And if you dare suggest a new method, congratulations, you've just ignited a generational argument more intense than the one about whether to salt turnips before or after boiling. In many villages, firekeeping was treated like a sacred family recipe, like the way we talk about grandma's pumpkin soup today. Except that if you mess up the soup, you just get a bad meal. If you mess up the fire, you could freeze to death. So yes, the pressure was a little different. Among other strange but essential tactics came the invention of bed warming. No electric heating pads, of course, but there were hot stones. A large rock, heated in the fire, then wrapped in cloth or leather and tucked beneath the straw mattress. If you're lucky, it stays warm till midnight. If not, you wake up to a delightful burn mark in the shape of a perfect circle. There was also the charming invention known as the hay box. Essentially, a box filled with straw, used to insulate a half-cooked pot of porridge. You bring the pot to a simmer, then seal it inside the straw box for a few hours. The residual heat finishes the cooking, no extra wood needed. Think of it as a primitive slow cooker, but with the delightful aroma of raw hay, and possibly the occasional bonus insect. When it comes to food, creativity was survival. Medieval folks used anything remotely edible, and a few things you'd never dream of. Dried pigskin? Soup. Old bones? Crushed and simmered into what was generously called broth. Vegetables? Mostly turnips and onions, because everything else had been eaten by mice, or was rotting in last week's cellar. There were no leftovers. The concept of reheating was a proud folk tradition. One pot of porridge might appear across 3 meals, changing shape each time: thin gruel in the morning, watered down soup by noon, then thickened into a kind of cold cake by night, sliced and eaten like bread. Add some lard, and it was practically a feast. Even water had to be used sparingly. The same pot might serve for cooking, washing, and yes, bathing. Which is probably why winter bathing was considered dangerous. People believed wet skin allowed evil winds to sneak in. So many chose the safest route: don't bathe all winter. Or at least until someone passed out from the smell. But don't be too quick to judge. That crust of sweat, dirt, and skin oil formed over weeks without a wash actually served as insulation. That's right, a natural, biological coat that helped you retain warmth. Some believed the filthier you were, the warmer you'd be. No one knew if it was true, but clearly, no one dared risk washing their face in December to find out. At night, as people curled around the hearth, old tales returned. Maybe it was about a talking wolf, or a witch living in the great oak tree by the field. The stories didn't have to make sense. They just had to be long enough to lull you to sleep, between the howling wind and the grunting pig snoring in the corner. Sometimes the grown-ups talked of stranger things, like winters that lasted till May, or rivers freezing so solid you could walk across them without falling in. Everyone remembered their own worst winter ever, and each new one was a promising contender for that title. You lie down, tug an old coat over your chest, feel the fading warmth of a stone near your feet, and listen to the fire crackle like it's whispering you a goodnight spell. Outside, the wind still howls. Snow still falls. But inside, though poor, though dirty, though cold, someone is sitting beside you, breathing steady. A story still lingers in the air, and tomorrow still waits. Because in this harsh, frozen world, sometimes all it takes is a bit of smoke, a shared laugh, and a crust of dirt not yet dry, to know you are still alive. And for now, that is enough. You wake up on a January morning, and instead of the rooster's crow, the first thing that rouses you is the sensation of your face being stuck to something damp. Not water. It's the cloth you wrapped around your face last night to keep your breath warm, now frozen stiff, and clinging to your cheek like a frost trap. You peel it off gently, then glance over at the person sleeping beside you, your grandmother, still asleep, her mouth slightly open, breathing out small streams of mist like a baby dragon learning to breathe fire. The house is still dark, even though it's already light outside. Winter sunlight trickles through the animal hide frozen to the window opening, casting only a faint yellow streak across the cold dirt floor. You look at the pile of ashes in the hearth. The fire is dead. And just like that, another day begins. No alarm clock, no coffee, no 5 more minutes. Just a stabbing cold and a clear mission, rekindle the fire. You crouch down, take the iron poker, and sift through the ashes in search of a glowing ember. If you're lucky, there's one still alive. If not, you prepare for a short but brutal battle with flint and dry straw. Your fingers are too cold to grip the stone properly. Each strike sends out a weak spark, like your own spirit in that moment. But after a few minutes, or half an hour, the first flicker appears. You carefully bring the straw closer. A thin wisp of smoke. Then a tiny flame, no larger than a fingernail, flickers like a whisper. Keep going. You cradle the flame, feed it scraps of wood, breathe into it. In that moment, you are no longer just a peasant, you are the one who brings life back to the household. The flame flares up, casting light on your face in the dark room. Your grandmother stirs slightly. Your cousin groans. The chicken in the corner starts to cluck. The day begins, because of you. In some lucky households, people take turns staying up at night to watch the fire. But if someone forgets, like today, then morning becomes a literal rebirth ceremony. No fire means no breakfast. No hot water. No warmth. And if the wind is strong enough, you might even see a layer of ice forming on the inside of the door. While waiting for the fire to grow, you sneak off to get breakfast. Not from the market, but from the cellar, or the pantry, or the corner of the house where the last sack of onions hangs. Maybe you'll find a chunk of old bread, hard as brick. You'll need a hammer to break it before eating. No one's teeth are good enough to bite through it whole. Breakfast is a workout. Winter meals are always a test of creativity. A bit of thin porridge, pickled turnip, a few scraps of dried meat left over from the week before. No sugar, no butter, no flavor, just filling enough to live. And if your stomach still growls after eating, that's normal. A medieval stomach knows winter isn't the time to be picky. After breakfast comes the light work, like hauling manure to the fields, or breaking the ice in the well to fetch water, or checking mouse traps, or clearing snow off the roof before it caves in. Winter chores are rarely glorious, but no one is allowed to rest. Even children are given jobs. A 5-year-old can start a fire. A 7-year-old can herd chickens through snow up to their knees. You look out across a white field, with only faint traces of fence posts remaining. The trees stand bare like skeletons. Wind whistles through the gaps between huts, shrieking like an invisible prankster. You pull your coat tight and step outside. The cold is so sharp that every step is a challenge. But in that cold, in the dim light, in your cracked, dry hands, lies the endurance of millions who once lived like you. And if you ask, why didn't they just leave? Go somewhere warmer? The answer is, they had no choice. This is homeland, ancestral soil, the land their forebears bled to protect. You don't abandon it just because it's cold. Because the cold isn't an enemy, it's a part of life. And living means accepting, adapting, and moving forward. No one calls when it's lunchtime. Because lunch, if there is any, is just leftover food from the morning. There's no such thing as eating your fill this time of year. Only still edible. You sit by the hearth, feed in a few sticks of wood. The fire crackles in response. On the wall, the cloak you hung up to dry is now stiff from sweat salt. You put it on, breathing in the smell of smoke, lightly scorched wool, and something hard to name, possibly goat. Even so, there is still joy. A child giggling as the first wave of warmth touches their cheek. A grandmother murmuring prayers over the ashes. A cat leaping onto your lap, curling up to sleep. These small things, in the harsh winter, become sacred. You exhale, watching the white breath rise and fade into the air. And you think, tonight, if the fire is still burning, if there's one piece of bread left, and if no one's coughing too hard, then that's a good day. In this world of frost, of lack, of smoke and mud, medieval people found a way to live. Not through comfort, but through patience, pride, and a quiet faith that could not be snuffed out. A single flicker of flame was enough to light an entire winter. You ever thought sleeping was simple? For medieval peasants, making it through a winter night without freezing was an art form. No electric blankets. No memory foam pillows. No bed to yourself. Here, a bed was a strategic resource, and warmth was a group effort. You, your grandmother, 2 cousins, your mother, and possibly the egg-laying hen, all of you slept in the same bed, which was really just a sack stuffed with straw, laid out on a damp dirt floor. Privacy? Not a chance. But in return, you kept warm thanks to a timeless strategy: the human lasagna. The youngest, always the priority, was tucked in the middle, like the soft filling. Elders slept on the inside, near the hearth. And you, if unlucky, ended up on the outer edge, where cold air from the door's cracks could slap your face. That was Bed Zone Level 3, Extreme Chill. If during the night you accidentally rolled over and pushed Grandma up against the wall, congratulations, you'd be hearing about it until noon. But on the bright side, the family stayed warm, and if everyone woke up with all 10 fingers, that was a win. Some households had their own innovations, hanging thick coats on walls to block drafts, or stuffing dry straw into the coldest corners of the floor. Some even smeared sheep fat on the interior walls, a homemade waterproofing technique that was surprisingly effective. The price? A year-round roasted mutton scent. On stormy nights, nature's roar crept through every crack. No need for Dolby Atmos. You had wind howling like wolves, thatch roofs creaking ominously, and the occasional startled chicken clucking from the shadows. If you were lucky, no mouse would run across your face at 2 a.m. There was a lesser-known trick, called slow breathing sleep. That's right. Breathing the wrong way could make you sick. The outdoor air was so cold that inhaling sharply felt like swallowing ice. So parents taught their kids to breathe through the nose, slowly and evenly, like monks in meditation. Wrapped scarves around mouths turned each breath into a tiny personal heater. By morning, that cloth might be frozen stiff and stuck to your skin. But better that than coughing like an ox all week from pneumonia. In that world, you learned to fear cold like a divine force, and to cherish every flicker of warmth. Beds, as you've gathered, weren't made for dreaming. They were survival tools. No pillows. No sheets. Just damp straw bags, refreshed every few months, or whenever the bugs inside started throwing nightly concerts. Beneath the bed, the earth floor stayed cold and wet like a frozen well. You'd usually lay bricks, stones, or more straw beneath you to avoid sleeping right on the muck. And that's not all. Some families used the hot stone tactic. A rock heated in the hearth was wrapped in cloth and tucked at the foot of the bed. Done right, it was like an ancient hot water bottle. Just don't roll onto it at night. If the wrapping came loose, you'd wake up with a blistered calf. But hey, at least you were warm. Sometimes, the animals joined the sleep squad: chickens, cats, even goats. A cat curled up on your chest was a fantastic heater. A goat under the bed? Not bad, unless it snored. And yet, in that mess, cold, damp, smelly, people still found closeness. Winter nights were storytelling time. Grandma spoke of the days when Grandpa was still alive. Dad told ghost stories. Mom hummed lullabies. Those little sounds filled the dark house and pulled people together, like a blanket made of words. In a society where death could come at any moment, from cold, hunger, or disease, just lying down together, surviving the night together, was a quiet kind of miracle. No celebration needed. Just steady breaths, flickering firelight, and a whispered promise. Tomorrow morning, we'll still be here. You wake up in the middle of the night. Not because of the cold, this time, no, but because of a faint sound. Maybe hooves. No, not a ghost. It's the cow. Your cow has just shifted in the darkness, shaking the ground beneath your bed. It shows no remorse, and even exhales a warm breath into the air like it's declaring, "I'm the heater of this house." And honestly, it is. Bringing livestock inside to sleep wasn't unusual in the Middle Ages. It was strategy. Chickens are small, but warm. Pigs are fat, but warm. But cows? Cows are the kings of warm breath. A house with 2 cows and a pile of straw could make it through winter without needing a miracle. The only problem is the smell. But when everyone stinks equally, who notices? The cow lies in the corner by the hearth, beside a wall smeared with goat fat and mud. A kitten is sleeping on its back, and a hen occasionally tucks itself against its belly. Interspecies relationships in winter are remarkable. Whoever's warm is respected. Sometimes, livestock is the main reason the family keeps going. Not for meat, but for milk, manure, and most importantly, body heat. A cow exhales enough moisture to leave condensation droplets clinging to the thatched roof. By morning, your ceiling drips with cow dew, landing on your bed and making you mutter, "Guess that's the new day starting." Inside the home, the hen is especially proud. She has her own spot, up high in the wall's corner, out of reach from children who tug her tail feathers for fun. Every morning, she lays an egg, a treasure more precious than gold in winter. You remember the time you broke one, and your mother looked at you like you just burned down spring itself. Since then, you've sworn to guard eggs like sacred relics. If you're wondering, how can anyone sleep with a barn's worth of animals inside? The answer is, you don't have a choice. Flapping wings, cow breath, pigs squealing from the cold, it's the nightly soundtrack. And over time, you don't just get used to it, you miss it if it's absent. In that world, sound means life. Some nights are so bitterly cold that neither humans nor animals can sleep. Everyone huddles around the ember-filled hearth, chickens roosting on your shoulder, a cat curled up in your mother's coat, the pig panting like it just ran a race. Eyes wide open, not out of fear, but because falling asleep could mean not waking up. You once heard your great-grandfather's story of that winter, when the snow reached chest height, and they survived 3 days on turnip soup thinned with hand-washing water. It doesn't sound delicious, but it's true. They lived, thanks to pigs' straw, and a stubborn will that refused to die. In some regions, people built raised wooden floors, both for cleanliness and to keep wandering animals off the beds. But most peasants didn't have that luxury. Beds, straw, dirt, people, animals, all blended like a survival stew, sometimes hot, sometimes cold. And you learn to accept it. If you can't change the cold, change your perspective. People in winter didn't just seek warmth, they sought humor. Your grandmother once joked, "Our pig sleeps better than your father." And your father, of course, didn't argue. Because he was sleeping on a lump of straw colder than stone with his aching joints. Laughter was how people endured hardship, not because it made things easier, but because it made hearts warmer. On holidays, if there was meat on the table, animals were sent outside. The family would clean up, lay fresh straw, and enjoy a pure meal. But after a few hours, the wind picked up, and the temperature dropped faster than pride after tax season. So you opened the door, called, "Moo!" and the cow returned like a regular guest being invited back to the party. Medieval folks didn't talk much about feelings, but you understood one thing: in winter, no one lives alone. Whether human or animal, anyone who gives warmth is valuable. No one gets left outside. Eventually, you lie down again, in that scratchy wool blanket, surrounded by old straw, with a cat pawing softly nearby, and a chicken softly snoring in the dark. And you're grateful. No one's sick today, the cow didn't go missing, and there's still an egg for breakfast tomorrow. One more night passes. And you, along with your uninvited furry roommates, have made it through, in a house full of smells, full of souls, and full of hope. You're hungry. Winter isn't exactly the best time to be picky. In fact, it's the season when you eat anything that doesn't run away. And if you're lucky, dinner will be more than just steamed turnips and a splash of thin porridge. On the coldest nights, medieval people had a survival trick you'll never find in a modern cookbook. The heavier your stomach, the better your chances. Not exactly poetic, right? But for them, dinner wasn't about enjoyment, it was about endurance. And that little trick had a name. Warm belly, warm body. It's no coincidence that the main dishes were thick porridges, root stews, and baked cakes that looked like they just came out of a clay oven, not a kitchen range. Barley porridge so thick the spoon stands upright, potatoes boiled to a mushy December sadness, and oat cakes mixed with animal fat. Those were luxury. You might catch a whiff of scorched pork fat, overcooked onions, and the slow-spreading warmth in your belly after a few spoonfuls of porridge thick enough to patch a wall. The adults would say, "Eat like this and you'll keep warm all night." And no matter how sleepy you were, you had to force down one more bite, because no one wanted to wake up at 3 a.m. in bone-cutting cold with an empty stomach. Fat was your best friend. From pig lard to sheep butter, from goose fat to unidentifiable fat, everything shared a common purpose: slow-burning energy to keep you warm longer. That's why winter soups always had a shiny film of grease floating on top. If you thought that was a mistake, nope, it was intentional. And you know what? After eating, you dream, strange dreams, the kind only possible after your gut is tasked with digesting 3 raw onions, half a bowl of dense porridge, and a fist-sized blob of fat. Some dreamed of riding cows through snowy fields. Others dreamed of fire crawling from the hearth and turning into a choir of singing turnips. Some dreamed they were a turnip. It didn't matter. As long as you woke up with all your fingers and no signs of a cold, dream whatever you like. Children were the ones most strictly fed. Crying or struggling didn't help. Every last bit of corn cake and boiled turnip had to be chewed and swallowed. Want to see spring? Then eat, your mother said, while your grandmother dropped another spoonful of fat into your bowl with a sly grin. Meat? It existed, but about as rarely as winter sunlight. It was mostly reserved for big festivals, when a pig was slaughtered and the village shared. Bits of fat, skin, and bone, the parts we'd throw out today, were treasures back then. Bones were simmered overnight to make what they proudly called original bone broth. And no, not for fancy stews, just to drink like tea, to warm the body and keep the breath steady through the night. The most common dish? Turnip porridge. And if you're imagining a light vegetarian meal, stop imagining. This porridge was thick, earthy, and might be mixed with dried onions, pickled garlic, and sometimes torn up old bread to increase density. Eat it once, and you'd remember it forever. Not for its taste, but because it kept you alive. Medieval folks also had strange little hacks, like drinking fermented turnip water to boost inner heat, or chewing licorice root to keep the throat warm, though afterward your mouth tasted like fermented mud. Hot beverages? Onion water, garlic broth, boiled stale bread water. Coffee didn't exist. Tea? A luxury. But if you steeped some hot water with a few onion slices and a pinch of salt, that was onion tea. Good enough to make the whole family breathe deeply, warm their bellies, and feel like they just had a feast. Someone once asked, "So medieval people never got to eat anything good?" Actually, they did. A hot meal, heavy on the stomach, and without pebbles in the porridge, was already wonderful. Dinner didn't end with dessert, but with a sip of bone broth, a whispered prayer, and the familiar words, "May tonight be peaceful. May tomorrow we're all still here." It's dark. Not the storm's coming kind of dark, but the thick, heavy dark, as if the entire world had been draped in a blanket of dense black velvet. No electric lights, no street lamps, and if you don't have fire, then it's just you and the howling wind. In that darkness, medieval peasants didn't rely solely on turnips and barley porridge. They relied on faith. Prayer wasn't just a Sunday church activity. It was a vital part of daily life, especially in winter, when even your breath could freeze, and a soft cough might be death calling your name. Before bed, the entire family often knelt beside the warm ashes, sometimes right on the cold dirt floor, hands clasped, whispering simple pleas. "Please, Lord, keep the fire alive. Please don't let it die. Please let us all still be here when morning comes." Not because they were superstitious, but because they understood, sometimes, survival depended on something beyond boiled turnips. Saint Nicholas, before he was turned into the jolly, reindeer-riding Santa Claus, was the patron saint of the vulnerable in winter. People prayed to him to keep the roof from collapsing, the coals from dying, and the baby from freezing in the night. In some homes, they even hung a wooden carving of him near the hearth, not for decoration, but as a reminder to the fire. "You don't get to die tonight." In the long night, a candle became a symbol of hope. Families who could afford it would burn a small taper until it went out, called the night watch flame, as if keeping the light on would scare the darkness away. Some would even drop a few drops of wine into the wax, believing the flame would last longer, and that misfortune might get drunk and lose its way. Sometimes, your mother would whisper a passage of scripture in a voice so soft it sounded like she didn't want to disturb the cold. Kyrie eleison! Lord, have mercy! The Latin words fell into the darkness like drops of water into a dry well. You didn't understand it all, but you listened, and felt something calm settle in your chest. There were elders, grandmothers, great-grandfathers, who could no longer tend the fire or work the fields. But they held a sacred role, the prayer keepers. While the rest of the family slept, they quietly recited prayers, moved their fingers along the rosary, keeping the spiritual warmth alive. If you woke up in the middle of the night, you might find your grandmother still sitting there, bead in hand, eyes distant, as if conversing with God in the kitchen corner. There were also folk rituals, things the church might not officially approve of, but the people still did. Garlic bundles hung above the door, salt at the foot of the bed, ashes sprinkled around the hearth to ward off spirits. Small, simple gestures, but they made people feel safe. Each region had its own beliefs. Somewhere, people thought if you touched the main beam of the house with your left hand before sleeping, you wouldn't have nightmares. Elsewhere, someone might stick a dry branch in the middle of the floor, to symbolize that winter has reached its end, and spring is on its way. They knew it wouldn't make winter shorter, but it made time more bearable. The children prayed in their own ways. Please, no wind tonight. Please don't let the cow step on me again. Please let there be eggs tomorrow. Tiny wishes like wooden spoons, holding whole universes of faith in little chests. When you open your eyes in the morning, see a faint glow still in the hearth, your brother softly snoring, and the thatched roof still clinging to the house, you know, the prayer was heard. It doesn't always work. But the very act of believing, of pleading, of hoping, that's what helped people push through the cold, one day at a time. And you understand, in this dark, damp house, filled with livestock noises and dry coughs, it is faith that shines as the warmest light humans ever created. Sometimes, no matter what you do, winter still wins. You could be the best fire starter in the village, a genius at insulating with straw, and know every single prayer to St. Nicholas. But when the true cold comes, it doesn't ask for your name. And if you had lived through the winter of 1315, you might have witnessed what would later be known as the Great Famine. From mid-1315 to 1317, Europe was plunged into such misery that even the elders shook their heads and said, "We've never seen anything like this." Rain. Endless, unrelenting rain through summer, then autumn, then winter. The sun vanished, buried beneath the mud. Fields drowned. Seeds rotted in the cold soil. Barley refused to sprout. Wheat couldn't stand upright. Even turnips gave up. And so, the people starved. Not the, "I guess we'll eat dinner early" kind of hunger. This was gnawing on leather shoes, eating tree roots, boiling bark into something called winter soup. In some places, people melted down candle wax and mixed it with bran. Children died from drinking unfiltered rainwater. And there were whispers, more terrifying than the wind, about cannibalism, about families vanishing in the night, about scattered bones behind village fences. Can you imagine? Stepping outside in the morning and not seeing any chimney smoke from your neighbor's house. Thinking, they must have overslept. But by noon, there's still no sound. You knock, no answer. You push the door open. And you understand immediately. They're not there anymore. Not because they left. But because they're gone. During that time, even the nobles weren't spared. The wealthy rationed their meals. The poor had none. One village sent letters begging for dried potatoes from another. Monasteries handed out bowls of watery gruel each morning. And anyone lucky enough to eat 2 meals a day became a hero. They say that winter wasn't just cold, it was hopeless. The laughter, the singing around the hearth, gone. Replaced by groans, sighs, and the growl of hungry stomachs in the dark. Even snoring got quieter. There were villages where everyone died. When spring finally came, all that remained were collapsed wooden frames, cold hearths, and a few stray chickens wandering through empty yards. History doesn't remember their names. but they lived. And they died. Because winter was too long, too cold, and too hungry. You could see it in the missing fingers of the elderly. Lost a few in that winter, but I lived. Or in the ones who dragged themselves out of winter with swollen legs, frostbitten ears, faces pale as lime. There were children who grew up never knowing a mild winter. For them, winter was always the enemy. And yet, they survived. Somehow, people still gathered around the ashes, split a turnip, murmured prayers together. They had nothing, no medicine, no food, no light, only each other. And in that utter desolation, people still kept a fire, not just in the hearth, but in their hearts. An old woman once said, "As long as someone opens their door first in the morning, then we haven't lost to winter." And if you listen closely, very closely, on a quiet winter night, you might hear the whispers of the souls who once endured, or didn't endure, those most brutal of years. Not to frighten you, but to remind you, we were here. We faced the cold, the hunger, and the dark. And if you are warm, breathing, alive, it's because we never gave up. You've just returned from a long journey, through frost-covered villages, old straw-thatched roofs, and quiet kitchens where the coals still glow faintly beneath layers of ash. Medieval winter wasn't glamorous. No twinkling lanterns, no electric blankets or ginger tea. But it held something simple and powerful: breath, warmth, and resilience. Now let it all melt away. Imagine yourself curled up beneath a rough wool blanket, your back resting against a warm earthen wall, a tiny red ember beside you still breathing softly. Outside, the wind murmurs like the whisper of a forgotten century. But in here, there is only stillness. Only the sound of your own even breathing. There's no need to think anymore. No need to struggle. The hardships of this winter night are behind you. Let your mind drift slowly, like smoke curling under a thatched roof. Light, thin, gentle. Close your eyes, and picture the moon casting silver light across the straw above. The wind may blow, but it touches only the animal hide door, sealed tight. Inside this small room, you are safe. There is nothing left to do. Just let sleep arrive, like a soft cloak draping over you, warm and tender. Tonight, there is no more winter. Only you, a soul at rest, floating in the quiet flow of time. May your sleep be deep. As light as ash, as soft as straw, and as long as a peaceful night in the 14th century.